Yeah, so I've actually got two comments on what you've just said. The first is about a chapter in the book that also, I think, very clearly elucidates what you're talking about now, which is called "Cry for Me, Argentina," if I've got it correctly. Because I think what it points to is the corollary of what you're saying. So, Argentina was one of the most prosperous societies in the world, but when we look at them today, they're hovering right at the bottom among such countries as South Africa, which, I mean, if you had told an Argentinian all those years ago that this would be the case, they would probably not even believe you. So I do think that there's a danger with optimism in the sense that it invites a kind of complacency. And I think we need to be wary of that. But I also think, as the second sort of comment to make, I think, when we talk about, obviously, the pessimism that a lot of students in your lectures come with, I think a lot of it is a product of the media and the way in which the media is reported. And you touch on the negativity bias in your book, which I think is a very, apt sort of a description of why people feel like this. Because there's also a sense in which, as Steven Pinker again points out in The Better Angels of Our Nature, I believe it was, where we were talking about that violence levels have gone down quite precipitously. I think that there's a sense in which, the media contributes to this, because it's very easy to sell a negative story. It's much more difficult to sell a positive story. It's much more difficult to sell the story of a place that was once in war that is now peaceful, or a place that was once impoverished but that is now prosperous. Those kind of things don't really sell in the media, and I think a lot of the pessimism is fueled by such news. So how do you think we can combat that kind of negativity that is spewed out at this high production rate in the mainstream? Because I do think that it's deluding a lot of young people into thinking that we're far worse than we actually are, when I think we've got a lot of gratitude that we owe to those who have come before us.
Well, I think everyone should buy my book and read it. I don't want to blame the media, because I think, it's perfectly irrational for them to do what they do, right? They want to sell newspapers and online clicks and all of these kind of things, increasingly so. So for them to then try and tell these kind of positive stories, they ultimately, you're going to lose out to the guy who sells the negative news, because that's what people want to buy, that's what they want to read. We, as you've mentioned, humans have a negativity bias. We want to make sure that, when there's a lion, we run. We don't want to have the kind of positive story about the grass is nice and green on this side if there's a lion sitting on it, right? So that is a problem of the type of media or the type of information that we consume. So I don't want to say the newspapers need to change their stories. They're never going to change it. If they do change it, they're going to lose out to those that do sell the negative stories. So the market will ultimately dictate that the media is negative. But I do think, through better kind of education, so that's partly, I'm in the education industry, so I think that's, we need to create a citizenship which are aware that they are consuming media that is negatively biased, right? So if you're in my class, then hopefully you say, well, actually, there are these long-run trends where you can see that things are improving rapidly. The sad thing, I think, is that this is not the case in all faculties, right? I think that certainly in my course, you would be exposed to these kinds of ideas. But I think there are courses at this university and at many other universities where you are never exposed to the idea that we are living much better lives than our ancestors did. In fact, many people would say we are living much worse, even though there's no factual support for those kinds of statements. But it's almost partly because the idea of fact is being questioned in many faculties and many ideologies that it's difficult to make this case in those kind of places. So to give you an example, I give a guest talk at a different department than my own, and at the end of that talk every year, I get this long queue of students who say, why have we never been exposed to these ideas before? And I'm just baffled. Like, this should not be news to you. This, you can just type in Wikipedia, what is the long-run decline in poverty like, and you will get the figures, right? Our World in Data is a public resource. You can get anything under the sun that you want there. But the idea that we can use data or we can use statistics to tell a story about human progress it's an idea that's fundamentally questioned in many disciplines these days. And I just think that's silly. Of course, we can, say that the world is a much better place in terms of higher levels of income, in terms of our ability to consume, population size, all of these things that we can measure. And of course, we can then also say, perhaps there are things that are not as great as they were. Maybe we should care also about, biodiversity. And then you would say, well, actually, in the richest of the rich countries, biodiversity is improving over the last 5 decades or so. So that's great, right? That means that we actually, if we're a rich society, we can pay for the things that we care about. So we can now spend money on improving the environment. And so those kind of things are, wonderful types of discussions to have. But if you don't believe in statistics, then we won't be able to ever have those kinds of discussions. So I do think that we are missing something in our education system that exposes students to these kinds of ideas. And that's partly why I actually really hope that the book does well outside of only my discipline. It shouldn't just be economists who read this. It should be everyone, and especially those in the humanities, I think, would benefit a lot from reading this.